For centuries, Rome's legions marched with fire in their hearts and steel in their hands. They crossed deserts where the sun scorched the earth. They scaled mountains where the air itself turned against them, and they carved their empire across 3 continents, believing that nothing, no force, no people, no land could defy the might of the eagle. But beyond the borders of their world lay realms untamed, lands where nature roared louder than the drums of war, where warriors fought not for glory but for survival, and where the very earth itself rose as an unyielding shield against Rome's unstoppable advance. This is the story of earth that Rome could never conquer. The world 2,000 years ago was trembling. Beneath a burning sun and under endless skies, there marched an empire whose shadow devoured continents. Its banners fluttered crimson in the wind, its legions thundered like storms, and its ambition burned brighter than any fire mankind had ever known. This was Rome, a civilization forged not in whispers, but in the roar of steel and the cries of conquest. From the rolling plains of Hispania to the scorching sands of Egypt, from the frozen rivers of Germania to the golden coasts of North Africa, the Roman war machine carved its mark upon the earth. The sound of their advance was unmistakable. Iron-shod boots striking in unison, shields glinting in the sunlight, and voices chanting as one beneath the weight of destiny. Every soldier was more than a man. He was a living instrument of empire molded through pain, fire, and discipline. They marched not only to survive, but to dominate. They built roads where there were none. They tamed rivers and mountains. They stitched distant lands together with stone, blood, and will. Behind them rose aqueducts that carried life across arid plains, and cities crowned with marble towers that gleamed beneath the heavens. Rome's power was not merely physical. It was an idea. So their expansion was not ambition. It was inevitable. The Senate spoke of destiny. Emperors dreamed of eternity, and the people believed that the eagle of Rome would one day soar over all the earth. Carthage burned, and its ashes whispered Rome's supremacy. Gaul bled under Caesar's ruthless campaigns, its forests echoing with the clash of steel and the cries of the conquered. In the east, mighty Egypt bowed before the crimson tide, and the traitors of Alexandria glittered beneath Roman rule. One by one, the pillars of the ancient world fell. And yet, in their triumph, they made a fatal mistake. For in chasing the horizon, Rome believed the earth would bend beneath its will. But beyond their maps lay worlds untouched, where the forests grew wild and endless, where mountains clawed at the heavens, where deserts stretched into eternity beneath an unforgiving sun. And there, in these unyielding lands, lived peoples Rome did not understand, fierce, untamed, and unbroken. They did not see Rome as destiny. They saw it as a threat. And they rose not with marble cities or mighty legions, but with something far greater. The earth itself at their side. Here, rivers swallowed armies whole, mountains shattered supply lines, winters froze legions. Nature itself fought back, carving invisible walls that even Rome's might could not breach. And yet the empire pressed on, wave after wave of soldiers, banners lifted high, hearts burning with the certainty. But what awaited them was not submission. It was resistance unlike anything they had faced before. For there are forces greater than ambition, lands more powerful than armies, and people who will not bow. For all its glory, Rome would soon face a truth it was never prepared to accept. There exists an earth that no empire can tame, an earth that Rome could never conquer. For centuries, the legions of Rome moved like an unstoppable tide, but there were places where the earth itself rose against them. The empire's hunger for dominion drove its soldiers far beyond familiar lands, into realms of untamed wilderness where nature built walls no army could breach. These barriers were not carved by stone and mortar, but by time, chaos, and the unrelenting hand of the elements. To the north, the Roman eagle cast its gaze toward Caledonia, the wild, mist-shrouded highlands of what we now call Scotland. Rome believed that with enough legions, enough steel, enough blood, no land could remain unconquered. But Caledonia was not like the rest of Britannia. Here, the land itself fought back. Endless bogs swallowed soldiers whole. Jagged hills shredded their formation. The forests, deep and ancient, became hunting grounds for warriors who struck from the shadows and vanished like ghosts. These were the Picts, fierce, untamed, and painted for war, their bodies marked in blue, their spirits unbroken. They knew the land better than any Roman general, and they wielded it as their greatest weapon. Rome tried to tame these wilds and failed. Hadrian's Wall rose not as a symbol of power, but as an admission of defeat, a stone barrier marking the edge of the empire beyond which even Rome dared not march. But Caledonia was not the only realm where nature crushed ambition. Far to the east, across the freezing rivers and dense black forests, lay the lands of the Germanic tribes. Here, among towering pines and choking swamps, Rome met its nightmare in the Teutoburg forest. It was the year 9C. The Roman general Varus led 3 legions, more than 20,000 men, deep into unfamiliar territory, believing victory was inevitable. But as they marched, the forests closed in around them, damp, suffocating, alive with whispers. Then, without warning, the shadows erupted. Spears rained from the treetops. Traps tore through armored lions. Roman discipline, their greatest strength, became their undoing in terrain where order meant nothing. For 3 days, the Germans slaughtered the legions without mercy. When it ended, Rome's mightiest warriors lay silent beneath the soil, and the empire's dream of pushing beyond the Rhine died with them. To the south, another wall of nature stood, the great deserts of Arabia and North Africa. Under the relentless sun, the empire's armor became ovens, their weapons branding irons, their water skins drying long before battles began. The sands devoured supply lines, camels had perished, and legionaries collapsed beneath skies that burned like fire. And then beyond deserts and mountains, there was the endless sea, a restless force that neither Caesar's ships nor Augustus' armies could tame. Storms shattered fleets, waves swallowed dreams whole. The empire could cross rivers, conquer continents, and march into kingdoms. But the oceans remained eternal, untamed and unbroken. Everywhere Rome turned, the earth reminded it of a truth it could not escape. There are forces beyond the reach of power. It was not just armies that stood in their way, it was the planet itself. Forests turned to traps, mountains became fortresses, deserts burned away ambition, and winters froze entire campaigns before swords could even be drawn. And in those places, untouched by Roman law, entire peoples survived, free beneath the skies, loyal not to emperors but to the land that sheltered them. Their defiance was not just rebellion, it was a bond between man and earth that no empire could sever. Rome could bend kings to its will, but it could not bend the wind. It could enslave nations, but not the storm. It could build walls to mark its power. Yet beyond those walls lay realms where the wild ruled eternal. The empire had reached its borders, not marked by stone, but by nature's defiance. And here, Rome began to understand that for all its glory, steel and fire, there are places on this earth where power holds no meaning, an earth that would remain forever untamed. Empires are built on conquest, but history remembers those who stood against them. For centuries, the Roman eagle soared high, casting its shadow across 3 continents. Kingdoms fell, cities burned, and armies shattered beneath the march of iron and discipline. Yet, scattered across distant frontiers, there were people who would not bow. They were fewer in number, poorer in wealth, less armed, less armored, and less organized. But where Rome wielded steel, they wielded something far greater, an unyielding spirit. To the far north, among the mist-covered highlands and jagged peaks, lived the Picts of Caledonia. Their land was wild, untamed, a place of stone, storm, and shadow. The Picts painted their bodies in deep blue-woad symbols carved not for beauty but for terror. They struck swiftly from forests and hills, their cries echoing through the fog as they disappeared into the wilderness before the legions could even turn. For years Rome tried to tame them. Roads were built, forts were raised, entire armies dispatched, but the highlands swallowed invaders whole. In the end, Rome abandoned its dream of conquest here, sealing its failure with Hadrian's Wall, a silent scar across Britannia, built not to expand the empire, but to keep its enemies out. Further east, in the dark forests of Germania, another defiance burned bright. Among towering pines and choking swamps, the Germanic tribes, Cherusci, Chatti, Marcomanni, lived free beneath an untamed sky. To them, Rome was not a conqueror, it was an intruder. It was here, in Teutoburg forest, where one man turned resistance into legend. Arminius, a warrior raised by Rome itself, who learned their tactics, their discipline, their weaknesses. When the time came, he betrayed his Roman masters and led a uprising unlike any in history. In the year 9C, 3 legion, nearly 20,000 soldiers, marched confidently into the dense German woods, their banners high, their formation tight. But they never returned. For days, Arminius' warriors struck like shadows. Spears rained from above, traps tore through Roman shields, and the thunder of the legions was drowned in screams and chaos. When the slaughter was done, Rome had suffered one of its greatest defeats. The Rhine became the border of the empire, and Germania remained forever unconquered. Yet resistance was not confined to forests and highlands. To the east, beyond scorching deserts and ancient trade routes, rose the Parthian Empire. Masters of the steppe, riders of unmatched skill. Here, Rome faced an enemy unlike any before, horse archers fast as the wind and deadly from afar. In 53 BCE, at the Battle of Carrhae, Marcus Crassus, one of Rome's most powerful generals, led 40,000 soldiers into Parthian lands, believing victory was certain. But the desert betrayed him. The sun burned relentlessly, water ran dry. And from the horizon came the sound of thunder, not from storms, but from thousands of Parthian cavalry. Their arrows fell like rain. The Roman formations, perfect on open fields, shattered under endless volleys, their heavy armor turning into cages beneath the sun. Crassus fell, his army broken, and the Parthians stood victorious. Rome would never truly conquer the East. For in these vast deserts, speed defeated strength, and the empire met its match. And far across the burning sands of Arabia, the nomads of the deep deserts, the Nabateans and Bedouin tribes, evaded Rome entirely. They did not need grand armies. The land itself was their shield. They vanished into seas of shifting dunes where Roman maps turned blank, and the empire's legions found only death and silence. From the mist of Scotland to the forests of Germania, from the steppes of Parthia to the deserts of Arabia, one truth remained unbroken. Power can command obedience, but freedom cannot be conquered. Rome, with all its might, discovered that no army, no matter how disciplined, no matter how feared, can break the will of a people defending their land, their families, and their way of life. These warriors, forgotten by time yet immortal in defiance, became more than enemies of the empire. They became symbols, living proof that Rome's reach was not infinite, that there were forces no legion could crush, and that even the greatest empire in history had its limits. And so, beyond the edges of Rome's maps, beyond its roads and walls, there remained pockets of resistance, wild, free, and untamed. The eagle could soar high, but it would never rule the skies. Every empire believes it is eternal until the earth reminds it otherwise. For centuries, Rome seemed unstoppable. Its legions marched across mountains, deserts, rivers, and seas. Its banners rose over cities once thought untouchable. But behind the victories, behind the shimmering marble of the Forum and the roaring triumphs of emperors, there lay cracks in the foundation. Rome's greatest strength, its vastness, became its greatest weakness. Stretching across 3 continents, the empire was a giant whose limbs grew too far from its heart. Roads carved through wilderness carried trade and wealth, but they also carried distance, came vulnerability. The farther Rome reached, the harder it became to feed its legions, supply its armies, and keep the empire's beating heart alive. Grain had to be shipped across stormy seas, weapons dragged across mountains, messages carried for weeks before reaching commanders. By the time an order from the emperor reached the frontiers, the war had already changed. In the wilds of Germania, this weakness became a death sentence. Vast, uncharted forests swallowed Roman supply lines. Roads turned to mud beneath endless rain. Wagons sank, and soldiers starved before they ever met an enemy. In the north, winters descended like an executioner's blade. Legionaries froze in their tents, their breath crystallizing in the air, their armor turning to ice upon their backs. Even Rome's greatest victories began to carry terrible costs. To hold Britannia, legions were stretched thin, battling revolts, building walls and defending roads deep into hostile lands. To hold Dacia, blood flowed freely as Rome fought tooth and nail to secure its golden mines. Every conquest demanded more soldiers, more resources, and more control, yet resources were finite. And beyond nature's fury lay another enemy Rome could never outmaneuver: disease. As armies marched across continents, they carried sickness with them. Plagues erupted in the heart of the empire, killing tens of thousands in the streets of Rome itself. Emperors watched helplessly as disease tore through legions faster than any barbarian spear. The empire bled silently and visibly from within, but the greatest wound came from Rome itself. For behind its marble walls, politics rotted the core. Emperors rose and fell in bloody succession. Civil wars erupted like storms, and rival generals turned their armies against one another instead of defending the borders. While the Senate plotted and power shifted hands, the frontier burned. And yet, still the empire pushed forward. Emperors demanded glory, and generals obeyed, into the deserts of Arabia, into the mountains of Armenia, into the endless wastes where maps faded into nothingness. The legions marched, but here the earth revealed its final limits. In the deserts, Rome found no water, no shelter, no victory. Supply lines withered beneath the sun, soldiers collapsed in the heat, and entire campaigns ended before a single battle could begin. In the storm-ravaged seas, fleets sank beneath violent waves, their treasures lost forever beneath the deep. In the frozen highlands, men died nameless beneath snows too deep to bury them. For the first time, Rome began to retreat, not because its legions lacked courage, not because its leaders lacked ambition, but because the world itself refused to yield, and in that realization came silence. The unstoppable tide had met its shore. The most disciplined army in history, the richest empire the world had known, the greatest power mankind had ever seen, could not conquer everything. For every road Rome built, there were paths it could not walk. For every city it claimed, there were lands it could not tame. For every army it raised, there were forces it could not command. The empire had reached its breaking point, and beyond its borders, a storm was waiting. An earth untamed, peoples unbroken, and an awakening that would echo through the century. History remembers the conquerors, but it honors those who could never be conquered. For centuries, the Roman Empire carved its name into the bones of the earth. Its roads spanned mountains, its aqueducts bent rivers, and its legions broke kingdoms beneath their march. At its height, Rome seemed invincible, the beating heart of a world reshaped by its will, but beyond its borders, the unconquered endured. From the highlands of Caledonia to the frozen wilds of Germania, from the deserts of Arabia to the endless steppes of Parthian, there existed places where Rome's banners never flew, where Roman law carried no weight, where the eagle's shadow could not reach. And in these lands lived peoples whose names may be forgotten by time, yet whose defiance carved eternal scars into the empire's pride. The Picts of Caledonia, fierce, untamed warriors, fighting barefoot through rain and stone, striking from forests where Roman shields could not follow. The Germanic tribes, free beneath towering pines, where warriors like our mightiest turned the very woods into weapons, slaughtering entire legions at Teutoburg and shattering Rome's dreams of domination beyond the Rhine. The Parthians, masters of the steppe, whose cavalry danced across deserts, their arrows striking from the horizon before vanishing like smoke on the wind. And the nomadic tribes of Arabia, elusive, untethered, disappearing into seas of shifting dunes where Rome's maps faded into nothingness. They were not united. They were not richer. They did not command the resources of an empire. Yet, in every way that mattered, they possessed something far greater: the will to remain free. Rome sent generals. Rome sent legions. Rome sent its greatest minds to subdue these lands. And yet, the earth itself stood as their ally. Mountains became walls that Roman roads could never cross. Rivers rose like unbroken fortresses. Deserts devoured entire armies. Winters fell with such savagery that steel froze to flesh, and soldiers died where they stood, buried beneath a silence deeper than any defeat Rome had known. But it was not nature alone that resisted. It was spirit. It was the unyielding fire inside those who refused to kneel. For Rome, power meant control. For these people, power meant freedom. And freedom, unlike cities, unlike gold, unlike kingdoms, cannot be conquered. Even as emperors claimed eternity, Even as the Senate wrote decrees for the ages, the lands beyond Rome's reach whispered another truth. There are places in this world where no empire can rule. The walls Rome built, Hadrian's wall in the north, Lime's Germanicus in the east, were not monuments of triumph. They were monuments of limits. They marked the edge of Roman ambition, silent reminders that even the strongest force in history had boundaries it could not cross. And as centuries passed, the unconquered endured. While Rome, once eternal, began to crumble from within, civil wars tore its heart apart. Plagues bled it dry, and finally the barbarians Rome once sought to control became the storm that toppled its crown. Yet those who resisted, those who stood unbroken against the greatest empire the world had ever seen, left behind a legacy far more powerful than victory. They proved that freedom outlasts conquest. The empire that sought to rule the earth was humbled by it. And today, when we stand upon the windswept highlands of Scotland, when we walk the forests of Germany, when we gaze upon deserts untouched by time, we walk upon lands Rome once dreamed of owning, lands where warriors bled and died to protect the soil beneath their feet. Lands where history speaks, not through monuments of marble, but through silence. A silence Rome could never break. The earth remembers. It remembers the people who fought. It remembers the lands that stood unbroken. It remembers the moment when the mightiest empire in history discovered its greatest truth. There are places on this planet that will never kneel. There is freedom no army can shatter. There is an earth Rome could never conquer. History remembers Rome as the empire that shaped the world. But it also remembers the lands it could not tame, the people it could not break, and the earth it could never conquer. The marble roads have crumbled, the aqueducts stand in ruins. The legions, once the thunder of the ancient world, now lie silent beneath forgotten soil. And yet, beyond those ruins, the unconquered still endure. High in the mist-covered highlands, where the Picts once painted their bodies in blue, the wind still howls through valleys Rome never claimed. In the dark forests of Germania, where Arminius warriors turned towering pines into weapons, the earth still remembers the cries of legions lost to the shadows. Across the burning deserts, where Parthian horsemen rode like storms, the sands still whispered battles where empire met eternity. And eternity won. Rome believed itself eternal, but the earth taught it humility. For all its might, for all its brilliance, for all its glory, Rome discovered a truth it could not escape. There are forces greater than steel. There are lands stronger than armies, and there is freedom no empire can ever command. And this is the lesson for us today. Power fades. Empires rise, and empires fall. But the spirit of defiance, the will to remain unbroken, and the fierce protection of one's home, these endure beyond time itself. When you stand on those wild lands untouched by conquest, when you gaze upon mountains no empire could cross, forests no army could tame, and deserts no legion could survive, you're looking at the eternal victory of the earth itself. Rome fell, but freedom did not. So I leave you with this. Remember those who stood their ground when the world's greatest power came crashing upon them. Remember the nameless warriors who bled for lands we now walk freely. And remember that even in an age of empires, the human spirit remains unconquered. Because somewhere out there, beneath ancient skies, across untamed rivers, upon windswept plains, the earth still whispers a truth as old as time. No empire lasts forever. No power is infinite. And there will always be places where the wild remains free. And that is the story of the earth that Rome could never conquer.